Good morning, everybody. Tom Kaczynski here. It's about 6 a.m. on October 28th, 2023. And I decided to record a video today because I've had a lot of you ask me for some thoughts on issues happening. And with that in mind, I mean, I'm not prepared to do ministry work with the channel right now. But Lord knows, pray for me, pray for my family. Pray for everyone. This world's going to hell in a handbasket, isn't it? But I came downstairs. I have to go out in a little bit, but we sit on the precipice potentially of World War III, and someone needs to tell you that if you don't realize that. I mean, the big tell will be probably if Iran's proxies and Hezbollah come across the border there from Lebanon, massive missile strikes. I mean, the thing is, modern warfare, right, is very different, and the weapons that give confidence in the American military, like the carriers, are honestly fixed targets that in the age of hypersonic missiles and drone strikes, I think would not prove viable against not even just state actors, but potentially a well enough armed militia in terms of what we see in foreign areas. You know, we think here in the United States, it's some guys running around with some guns, you know, maybe a sawed-off shotgun or someone who converts a semi into a real automatic, but that isn't where the story is. These are like Hezbollah, they think has, depending on who you listen to, has somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000, missiles, and I don't care how many, defensive systems you have, you don't have enough chaff and anti-ordnance. Plus, I mean, look at the military we have, right? They have made clear that the very people who've won the wars are the people who they don't want running this country anymore. You know who I'm talking about. Christians, certainly, and if you look a little bit like me, you're probably in that list too, regardless of which side you fought on in the old days, because the world's different now. You know, elections have consequences and stolen ones more than most, right? I think that we have reached a point where you need to be thinking differently. You need to be thinking of your preparations. You need to be thinking of getting apart, getting away. You need to be thinking if a draft comes. I mean, if this government gets into a fight, and presuming they don't instantly get knocked out of the war, which is a non-zero possibility because then we live in purge world, they'll have to do one of two things. They'll have to take all those illegals they brought in, give them guns, train them up, send them to war, and then send them back to oppress us. That's a possibility. Rome went down that path, and you know how that story ended. Or alternatively, they'll have to ask the same people who are suffering and miserable to go fight a war for a country that has the people who lead to the oppression and misery. And I guess I find it encouraging that so many young people don't want to fight. The history of political Zionism is well known, covered by a lot of people. The guy who does, Call for an Uprising, has done a good enough job talking about the bagel issues, and I'll leave it at that. If you don't know the story by now, you probably won't. But suffice it to say, look at your Bibles, Revelation 3:9, and understand that in this war, regardless of what you've been told, regardless of the program you've been given about how Muslims are an issue, and there are issues there. I'm not here to paper over them. Ultimately, the way Christians have been treated by the state which we are supporting over there has been reprehensible for decades. And the relationship that exists, you couldn't even read the polling on this, is toxic. I mean, evangelicals specifically have a plus 30 view of the state of Israel, whereas the people who live there have a minus 30 view of the people they help. It's an abusive relationship that some well-heeled televangelists and others support based on terrible theology. I mean, do you really think if the Lord, if the Father put his Son through the horror that he experienced for all of us to be the perfect sacrifice, do you think that we're going to be saved and magically whisked out before things get badly? It's a nice dream and a nice fantasy, and I see why people like it, because then Christians don't have to care about the consequences of the world around them. And that's why I call it heresy these days. Pre-trib is a heresy if you believe it. I encourage you to read the Bible and be considerate. I encourage you to read the Gospels and the words of Christ and consider that too. But today's job is not to give you that lesson. Today's job is to tell you what's coming down the pike. And what's coming down the pike is going to be more repression and oppression, because regardless of what this government does, it's going to take some very unpopular actions one way or another, and it's going to blame its own people. I've been thinking about this, and we'll even see even the Robert Card thing. How weird is that one, right? The dude goes in there, and supposedly he's having issues, if you read various things in the back chatter, with different groups of people, and then he kills a bunch of men defending their children at a bowling alley. Now, the backstory on this, and Dane has been watching a lot, because, we're up here in Maine, and it's a concern to us, is the guy gets a hearing aid, and he starts hearing voices telling him to do things. And not that he wasn't disturbed after 20 years in the military, who wouldn't be nuts? Of course, the same people who are saying that, we can't have guns are telling us, go in there and that'll work out fine for you. Funny how they don't look at one part of the equation, right? But when you start studying things like voice-to-skull technologies, you look at, what's his name, Robert Duncan's books, Project Soulcatcher is a really interesting book. He also wrote one called How to Tame a Demon. Governments have understood since at least the 1970s how to beam voices right into your head so you can hear things, so schizos can be crazy. And to be very clear, I do think people hear voices that are not necessarily from the government. I think they're demonic influences, and I do think people are crazy. However, it gives perfect cover for when you want to have ideas. So imagine just for a second, just for a moment, you wanted to go to war, and you had people who didn't want to fight. You say, oh, here's an earpiece, your team can go together. And you think you just have a communicator so that people can listen to you. You hear voices in your head, take out this target, and you think it's your own internal voice. Because the one thing we've learned about NPCs is they don't have a lot of internal monologue. In fact, the NPCs are being encouraged to proliferate, while those of us who are chosen to believe something more, who can visualize things in our heads, are being targeted. Funny how this works, how humanity is being sculpted and scripted into something new. This is the meta level at which people are not even prepared to look at the contest. And it's the sort of stuff that gets you in trouble. And this channel at this point is disposable because this platform is compromised. And that's fine. I've known that for a long time. But people have asked me to come on and to share some thoughts. So I'm going to share these thoughts with you. And we'll talk for about 20 minutes today because then I got to go. So that'll keep me constrained to a limit. And if you like this, hey, hit a like. The Venmo's still up, CVC PRV. Haven't seen anything in a while. Maybe I'll come on from time to time and say things. Can't do live shows because YouTube has made it impossible for me to do that, and I don't really care to censor myself, so when I get hit with my strikes, the channel's gone, and so am I, and that's okay. If you want to set something else up, come build a studio for me, or better yet, help me get to Argentina, because I want to get the hell out of this country. So does Dana, and so should you. But if a draft comes, I was thinking about a draft today, and the thing about a draft is there's two things that are really being missed here. Number one is the people most capable of fighting, both veterans who have seen how terribly they were treated through the jab, through other things, through the ideological prism, the purges that happened in the military, where they support woke ideologies, and just the waste of people to fight cynical wars for military-industrial contractors. Is one part of it. The second part of it that not enough people are thinking about is the debt burden. And yes, the national debt's insane, $33 trillion in the dollar. That's why the inflation rate's so high, to try to make dollars look like it has something. Is the rest of the world saying we want off this ride? That the Swiss and their sort of friends put us on. It's really interesting. No one studies this, but you should if you want to go deep down rabbit holes. How all these groups kind of come out of the Alps. Whether it be the Swiss and the Habsburg domains there, or Austria. You look at Herzl and Zionism, that came out of the same milieu as Hitler and the Nazis. Right? You're not allowed to say those things. And even if you look at the Havara Agreement and some of these things, that there's a relationship. And it's interesting, like the Pike letter to Mazzini, that supposedly, does or does not exist. And I've read Pike at length. I won't say we wrote that letter, but I will say it sounds a hell of a lot like something you would. What I will say, though, is that when you think about it, what you find is that at some point, people who are willing to do evil things for power sacrifice their own people, much like the state of Israel was sanctified despite the fact it committed genocide, but the genocide purportedly committed against it. And yet the bankers who are so happy to speak to that group there were the ones who funded the people who supposedly destroyed them, and something to consider. If you haven't done your research by now, you're late to the game. Just take my word for it. I'll tell you, things are not what they appear to be. And the Swiss have played a double-dealing role, sitting in the middle of Europe, with their inverted Templar cross. Yeah, I know what you did with the colors. I saw that. Anyway, and they're hiding in the safest mountain place in the safest place of Europe, which has always been neutral through every war since at least Napoleon helped get that started. And, you look at the Masonic links there. Leave that alone for a moment. But back to America, and actually to the Western world. Because of inflation, and I mean true inflation, not the BS statistics they cook up, but the energy, food, and rent prices, where food seems to go up, what, I shop all the time, 5 to 10% a month, every 2 months. A jar of olives I was looking at was $5 up here. Jar of olives, you get them for $2 a couple years ago, and they're telling you, and I mean real food, not the crap that you get mass-produced that make you sick, but the actual food that's worth eating to have nutritive performance, protein for your mind, healthy fats. Can't afford it. And at the same time, they've cut down food stamps, so the people are desperate, people in a bad spot. Rent has gone up like crazy. Interest has gone up. Gas prices have not gone up yet, but wait for it. That's coming. And the access to ownership. People say, oh, well, you need to support capitalism. Not this. People can't own their houses. This is serfdom being imposed. Understand that. So when UBI comes along, you own things. And Generation Z, who's young people who've been dispossessed of their future by leveraging of debt by people older than them, that's what it really is, who enjoyed the good times and who sent everything abroad and collateralized like a reverse mortgage on life, are going to have a decision to make. Are they going to just go along with this? Or are they going to say, wait a second, we could either fight for you over there and die for a war where we will have nothing left and you will just stay, or we can do something here, and then not only will we be against the people who are against us, but conversely, we also could have the debt jubilee we need, where debts will be forgiven, because since your government's gone, the debts that you sustained under it will disappear. And yes, will there be poverty and misery and suffering in that world? Yeah, but you know what there also will be? Freedom. Freedom is painful. Freedom is ugly. Freedom will hurt. But that's the decision you're going to have to make. Is it going to be perpetual servitude in whatever is given you, or will it be something different? And if this war should come, and if they demand the people fight for them, this is the choice people will have to make, and they'll have to make it quickly. And I don't know if they realize that. A lot of people don't, but a surprising amount of people do. And when you look at the number of people who've been standing against this, and let's talk about the war itself. Let's just talk about what we're actually fighting. Gaza, 1967 war, okay? Once you understand that they call them settlers over there, and they are settlers, that land was Palestine. That land had been occupied by the Arabs who lived there for centuries under the Ottomans and then the Mamluks before that. So what ends up happening is they decide, okay, we're just going to go in here. And in 1948, when they wanted their land, they went and they basically killed the people in the villages where they didn't want them there. And that's how they got their land. And in every war, and I'm not going to claim the Arabs didn't fight back, it was conquered, much in the way that we threw Indians onto reservations, and that's true. And you can say that's good or bad, but it's the truth. You can't blame them for resisting when you do that. By 1967, Gaza was thrown into a reservation, and most of the people who were born there, let's see, if you are older than, I was born in 1980, and I'm about to be 43, so 56 years old, and they don't live to be very old, most people there. You've lived in a prison that was run by another country for your whole life, and you could say, well, that's a state. It's not a state, it's a prison. It's people attacking their own people, just like we saw them do in Ukraine with the people of Donbass for 4 years. The Israelis have been using the same model, and interesting, you look at Zelensky's ethnic background and what he supports. Oh, by the way, look at how they're persecuting the Orthodox, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church over there. They're throwing pastors, clergymen in jail. They don't tell you that, but that's the side we're supporting, because we're the baddies. We're Babylon. The Assyrians are running amok again until the Lord strikes them down. But when you look at what's happening over there, it's been a prison, and if they are violent and angry about it, I understand why. And does that endorse what they did to the people who were at that festival, if those died, or whoever were in those kibbutzes? No. But I tell you what, every interview I've seen of someone who was in one of those things, who was taken and released, they were treated much more humanely than having bunker busters leveled over your city, which is what's happening. And I don't blame the Arab Street for being mad, and I don't blame the people who are standing against this. This is not a just war. This is not a good war. This is not a righteous war. This is genocide. And this is genocide not even in support of people who have beliefs. I mean, look, war is an ugly reality that people have to deal with in history. Every land, everywhere was taken from someone by someone else. That's just true. You don't have to like it, but it is true. But this case, we, as in the West, the United States, Europe, those countries that are backing this, are backing a country that hates and exploits us, and that is using us as rocket fuel to try to build themselves a future they can hold on to, and they are alienating the entire world. In the age of mass communication, I was watching what was happening in Gaza last night. I'm watching preemie babies die in a hospital because they can't get supplies. And you think you can shut down communications? It isn't that simple. Those videos will come out. and people will know the truth, and they will demand with righteous anger that those who do these things are held to account. I mean, maybe we need to rethink nationhood. Maybe we need to have countries where people who believe things are put separately from one another instead of these forced mass groups. And I don't know what the future's going to bring. Probably apocalypse. I mean, most of the conditions of the book of Revelation are coming into focus pretty damn quick. Story for another time, but I have to presume that the world might continue on because we all have to live, we all have to survive, and, I'm still here in Maine for at least another 6 to 8 months, probably, unless one of you wants to team up and send a few $1,000s, in which case, send me a line, work something out, I'm not even joking. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with. This is the world in front of us. We have a ruling class that is in complete thrall to the bankers. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, they own everything. The people who manage that, your Larry Fink types, and you have your Klaus Schwab and George Soros types who have built a consensus. And the world they want is a world that's thinly populated, run by a few elites, where a lot of people are dead, and that they have systems to manage the survivors. Probably the Antichrist waiting to come forward, like a pharaoh out of the night, if you believe Dana, and she has some good points in it, there's 44 clues to who it might be. But anyway, these are the sort of things we're going to see in the future. And we're already seeing it, the reimposition of serfdom in slow motion. And in serfdom, it was a good deal for the nobles, and we sort of lionize those things and fun things like Ren Fair, but it's a really bad deal for the serfs. And the serfs, at least in the old days, they had a lot of holidays because the people in charge realized others broke down. In the age of automation, you are considered expendable. And as we see more jobs go away from these other sectors, and the promise that, the military will regenerate things like it did in the 1930s, like it pulled us out of FDR's, long-lasting depression. I'm not saying Hoover wasn't to blame for a lot of things. Two sides of the same coin. We get a new speaker. Evangelicals get excited. Mike Johnson, right? First thing he's doing is, we're going to go support Israel for everything we have. Okay. Well, you can go do that, but the people shouldn't do that. And it's not because I'm not here to lionize Hamas. I mean, they use terror tactics of desperation. It's true. It's absolutely true. But wouldn't you be desperate if you had been locked in prison as a people since, let's see, 67 to 27? We're now looking at 56 years? Your whole life? I mean, don't you think that might cause some problems? And did they do this now because it was an opportunity for them to draw attention to people being forgotten? Yeah, they did. I don't blame them. It was politically a shrewd move. It's cynical as all hell, but it did work, and it changes the scale. And now we look at a civilizational war, and if that war ends up being Islam versus the West, I would ask you, brother Christian and sister Christian, is this West the West you should be fighting for, or should you be fighting against it? Because I tell you the truth, and I don't like Islam. I don't like apostasy. I don't like idolatry. The Lord commands that. And yet, I will tell you, and from enough conversations I know this, in Palestine, they treat Christians a hell of a lot better than they do in Israel. And it's getting to the point where they even treat them better than they do in the United States. You look at Ukraine as their project of what they want to do. The multicultural future where the women leave to go run off and the men get killed in a war and the land gets lost and the people who are responsible, they inherit it, make the contracts, and then say, oh, well, we have a brand new future. Yeah, they have a brand new future and you aren't part of it. It's a big club and you ain't in it. George Carlin said that. Smart man. Angry man, but a smart man. So these are the things, this is the real world of what we live in. But what can you do? You can prepare for your family. You can get yourself apart. Don't live in a city. I wouldn't want to live in a multi-ethnic area either. Sorry, don't mean to be mean. It's the truth. You need to think about these things. I'll come back from time to time. You guys want me to talk. Make it worth my while. Okay? I get nothing for this, but I'm already on every list. I don't care. I really don't. I'm just here in Maine hiding out. That's what I'm doing. And I've been doing it for a long time because you don't ever see the details, but when you see clouds of the sky, you know where thunder's coming, right? You don't need to know where every bolt is going to strike. Not necessary. So I hope this will be helpful to someone. Shout out to my friends out in Bill's Mafia land. You know who you are. I'm sure you'll appreciate this as a chance to get your day going. And, hopefully you find some value in this. I'll probably rebrand the channel, but one thing that isn't going away is that these events, tribulation itself, if this is what we're experiencing, and we may be, is an invitation to realize the limits of what humanity can do for itself. And, I think if you see the limits of secular culture, of the idea of libertarianism, or the idea of just license of allowing all things, we need wisdom. We need the Lord in our lives. We need the truths that Jesus shared, and we need a society that honors those and institutions that cherishes those. So just pray for the Lord to lead you in your life where he will lead you, and pray for the Lord to help us as well, and we'll pray for one another as we always have. That's one thing we do, and if you need personal instruction, I'm not hard to find. Just go on Telegram, or Twitter for that matter, at Tom Kaczynski on either, I think is what I'm at. So if you want to send a couple bucks, always appreciate it. I don't expect you to have it, but hey, if you do it. CVC PRV, thank you. God bless. Have a great rest of your morning and keep safe. Final reminder, if you see massive war happening on the northern border of Lebanon, you better presume war with Iran is around the corner. And as for me, I think that means that World War III, although it may not be imminent, will be inevitable. All right. God bless.